You're closer to retirement than your savings are, and that gap isn't small, it's loud. If that sentence made you uncomfortable, good. Because for a lot of people watching right now, the problem isn't a lack of effort, it's that time quietly sped up while life was busy happening. Careers, kids, layoffs, market crashes, rising costs, and suddenly the finish line doesn't feel theoretical anymore. It feels close, uncomfortably close. Welcome to the channel, where we don't sugarcoat money, but we also don't panic. Today we're talking about a generation that got skipped in the retirement conversation for far too long. Not the ones already collecting checks, and not the ones still convinced they have plenty of time. This is about the group stuck in the middle, carrying the weight of yesterday's promises and tomorrow's reality, while still paying today's bills. Here's the part most people miss. This isn't a story about failure. It's a story about rules changing mid-game. The safety nets quietly vanished, the playbook shifted, and somehow everyone was expected to just figure it out while juggling real life. No instruction manual, no do-overs, and definitely no sympathy from the system. But here's where it gets interesting and where the fear narrative breaks down. Despite all of that, there's a window still open. Not wide, not comfortable, but real. And what happens in the next few years matters more than the last 20 combined. There are moves that work now that didn't matter before, levers that only become powerful at this stage, mistakes that look harmless but are quietly expensive, and opportunities most people overlook because they're stuck replaying old advice that no longer fits. We're going to unpack all of that in this video. Calmly, honestly. With a little humor, because if you can't laugh at the absurdity of it all, the stress wins. Stick with me because the dots connect in ways most people never see until it's too late, and by the end you'll understand exactly why the situation isn't as hopeless as it feels, but also why procrastination is no longer an option. If this conversation matters to you, hit like, subscribe for clear, no-nonsense money discussions, and stay to the end. This is one video you don't want to half watch and forget. Retirement planning for Gen X closing the huge savings gap. Generation X is standing at a financial crossroads that feels both unfair and oddly familiar. This is the generation that did what it was told: work hard, get educated, stay loyal, buy a home, save what you can. Don't rock the boat. And yet, here we are, midlife approaching fast, retirement no longer a distant rumor, and a savings balance that often feels more like a suggestion than a plan. This isn't because Gen X was careless, it's because Gen X lived through economic whiplash. Recessions arrived like uninvited guests who refused to leave quietly, jobs disappeared, pensions quietly slipped into history books, healthcare costs ballooned, college tuition exploded, housing became a game of musical chairs with fewer chairs every year. And somehow, in the middle of all that, Gen X was expected to build a flawless retirement strategy with no instruction manual and a constantly moving target. The result is a savings gap that isn't theoretical, it's personal. The awkward math no one loves to talk about. On paper, retirement planning looks simple: save early, invest consistently, let compounding work its magic. In reality, Gen X spent much of adulthood just trying to keep the lights on while doing the math in their head and hoping the numbers would magically improve later. For many, retirement savings are nowhere near where traditional guidelines say they should be by this stage of life. That realization hits differently in your late 40s and 50s. It's not panic yet, but it's loud concern. The kind that shows up at 2 a.m. when sleep should be happening. What makes it worse is the constant comparison game. Headlines talk about record stock markets and millionaire retirees while ignoring the uncomfortable middle. The average balances hide enormous disparities. Some are doing well, many are not, and most are quietly wondering how the gap got so wide without anyone ringing an alarm bell sooner. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Time is no longer abundant, but options still exist. That distinction matters more than any spreadsheet. How Gen X got caught in the middle. Every generation faces challenges, but Gen X had a unique financial timing problem. They entered adulthood just as the retirement system shifted responsibility from employers to individuals. Pensions faded away. Self-directed retirement accounts took over. Financial literacy was assumed rather than taught. At the same time, wages didn't keep pace with living costs. Housing absorbed more income. Healthcare crept higher every year. Childcare became a second mortgage. Supporting aging parents arrived earlier and lasted longer than expected. Saving for retirement often became the thing that would start next year. Then came the market crashes. Just as balances began to grow, they shrank. Confidence took a hit. Some pulled out, some froze, some never quite trusted investing the same way again. None of this makes Gen X irresponsible, it makes Gen X realistic. Survival often came before optimization. The psychological weight of running out of time. One of the hardest parts of retirement planning at this stage isn't math, it's emotion. Regret sneaks in quietly. Fear shows up loudly. Comparison becomes brutal. There's a specific sting that comes from realizing that the luxury of waiting is gone. The phrase, "I'll get serious about this later," stops working. Every decision feels heavier because the margin for error feels thinner. But here's the part most people miss. Urgency does not equal hopelessness. In fact, urgency can be clarifying. It forces focus. It strips away nonsense. It turns vague intentions into concrete action. The mistake many make is letting shame delay progress even further. Avoidance feels easier than confrontation. Unfortunately, avoidance is expensive. Why the next 10 to 15 years matter more than the last 30. Compounding works best with time, yes, but income works best at its peak. And for many Gen Xers, peak earning years are happening right now. That reality doesn't erase past mistakes, but it dramatically changes future possibilities. Saving aggressively later in life can still move the needle in meaningful ways, not in a flashy overnight sense, but in a steady confidence-building way. The key difference now is intentionality. Casual saving no longer cuts it. Every dollar needs a purpose. This stage rewards clarity. It punishes autopilot. Getting honest. Without getting overwhelmed. Retirement planning begins with an uncomfortable but necessary step, looking directly at the numbers, not the hopeful version, the real one. How much is saved right now? How much is still being contributed? What does retirement actually cost, not in theory but in lifestyle terms? These questions are uncomfortable because they remove ambiguity, but ambiguity is the enemy of progress. This is also where assumptions need to be challenged. Retirement does not have to look like a brochure. It doesn't require perfection. It requires sustainability. A slightly later retirement with financial peace beats an early one filled with anxiety. Flexibility matters more than fantasy. The power of catch-up years when used properly. Later stage saving comes with tools earlier decades didn't offer. Higher contribution limits exist for a reason. They're an acknowledgement that many people need a second act. The danger is assuming these tools automatically fix everything. They don't. They only work when paired with consistency and discipline. Sporadic large contributions don't replace steady habits. The advantage Gen X has is focus, fewer competing priorities, more clarity about what matters, less tolerance for financial chaos. When leveraged properly, that mindset can be powerful. Risk isn't the villain, misunderstanding. It is one of the most common mistakes at this stage is becoming too conservative too soon. After experiencing multiple market downturns, fear feels rational. The instinct is to protect what's left at all costs. But avoiding growth entirely carries its own risk. Inflation doesn't announce itself loudly, it erodes quietly. A portfolio that feels safe may slowly lose purchasing power over time. The goal isn't reckless risk-taking. It's balanced exposure aligned with time horizon, income needs, and emotional tolerance. Stability matters, but so does growth, especially when retirement could last decades. Fear-based decisions often feel safe in the moment and expensive later. The expenses that quietly sabotage retirement. Saving more helps, but spending smarter matters just as much. Certain habits drain future freedom without drawing attention to themselves. High-interest debt is an obvious culprit, but lifestyle creep is sneakier. So is indefinitely supporting adult children out of guilt or habit. So is ignoring healthcare planning until it becomes urgent. Retirement isn't just about how much money comes in, it's about how efficiently it's used. Every unnecessary dollar spent today is multiple dollars missing tomorrow. This isn't about deprivation, it's about alignment. Spending should reflect values, not autopilot. Redefining retirement on your own terms. One of the biggest mental shifts Gen X must make is letting go of outdated retirement imagery. The gold watch, the abrupt stop, the all-or-nothing exit. For many, a phased transition makes more sense. Consulting, part-time work, flexible schedules, lower-cost living. These aren't compromises, they're strategies. Retirement is no longer a single event, it's a transition. And transitions offer room to adjust, adapt, and breathe. Financial independence isn't about stopping work entirely, it's about choosing work on your terms, the quiet advantage of experience. Younger generations have time. Older generations had guarantees. Gen X has experience. They've seen bubbles burst, promises break, systems change. That perspective is valuable. It encourages skepticism, diversification, and adaptability. When applied correctly, experience becomes an asset rather than a reminder of lost opportunities. Gen X doesn't need miracles. It needs momentum. Building momentum instead of chasing perfection. Perfection is the fastest way to stall progress. Waiting for the right strategy, the right market moment, or the right income level keeps people stuck. Momentum comes from small, repeatable actions, increasing contributions gradually, automating savings, reviewing plans annually, adjusting instead of abandoning. Consistency beats brilliance every time. The role of health in retirement. Planning. One of the most underestimated retirement factors is health. Not just insurance costs, but energy, mobility, and quality of life. Investing in health now reduces financial pressure later. Preventive care, movement, stress management, these aren't lifestyle luxuries. They're long-term financial strategies. A longer, healthier working life can also provide flexibility many plans assume won't exist. Letting go of the guilt narrative. There's a quiet shame many Gen Xers carry about retirement, the feeling that they should have known better, that they missed something obvious. That narrative isn't helpful. The system wasn't transparent. The rules changed. Life happened. What matters isn't what didn't happen. It's what happens next. Self-blame doesn't grow savings. Action does. Closing the gap isn't about catching up to others. Comparison is toxic in retirement planning. Someone will always be ahead. Someone will always look more prepared. The real question is whether the gap between where you are and where you need to be is shrinking. Progress is personal. A realistic plan executed consistently beats an ideal plan executed sporadically. The opportunity hidden inside the pressure clarifies priorities. It exposes waste. It forces honest conversations. For Gen X, this moment is uncomfortable but powerful. It's a chance to reclaim control before decisions are made by default. Retirement planning at this stage isn't about optimism or pessimism. It's about realism paired with action. The window isn't wide, but it's open. Final thoughts. The story isn't over. Retirement planning for Gen X isn't about erasing the past. It's about reshaping the future with intention. There is still time to build security, still time to increase flexibility, still time to create options. The savings gap is real, but it's not a verdict. It's a challenge. And Gen X has faced challenges before. The difference now is that waiting is no longer an option, and clarity is finally an advantage. The next chapter doesn't require perfection, it requires participation. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I truly appreciate you taking the time to watch. Today, we broke down the real retirement challenge facing Gen X, a system that changed mid-game, savings that didn't grow as promised, and a timeline that suddenly feels much shorter than expected. We talked about why the gap exists, why it's not a personal failure, and most importantly, why the next 10 to 15 years matter more than everything that came before. We covered mindset shifts, smarter saving, realistic risk, lifestyle choices, and how redefining retirement can turn pressure into opportunity. The big takeaway is simple. The situation is serious, but it's not hopeless. Progress doesn't require perfection. It requires action, consistency, and clarity. The window is still open, and what you do next can change the outcome in meaningful ways. If this video gave you value, hit the like button. It really helps the channel reach more people who need this message. Subscribe for more honest, practical conversations about money, retirement, and financial independence. And most importantly, share this video with someone who might be quietly worrying about the same things but hasn't started the conversation yet. Your future self will thank you for starting now.